Our company has a policy that the moment somebody is hired, they need to go through orientation first. Once they go through orientation, then they can become an active employee. Currently, everybody with us has been through orientation, but we're getting ready to hire somebody new. And the moment we insert them, we want their status to always be set to orientation. Now, we'll update it a couple days or weeks later once they've completed the orientation. So let's set up a default constraint to do this. Let's type alter table, and let's alter the employee table, and we're going to add a constraint, and we'll call it df_employee_status, which is based off the name of the field that we're going to set this default constraint on. The default value will be orientation, and that is going to be for the status field. And I'm delimiting that in square brackets because status is also a keyword. All right, let's run this. Command's completed successfully. Now, we're getting ready to use this for the first time by inserting into the employee table the following values for your 15th employee. And you know what? While we're doing this, let's look at the data in the employee table right now and match it up. Okay, the last employee was 14, so this next employee will be employee 15. The employee's last name will be Jones. The first name will be Tess, and they will be hired on the current time that we run this statement. So we'll say current_timestamp. And the location will be location 1, which is the Seattle location. She will work for Sally, which is manager ID number 11. And the status we're going to set to default. The hired offset will be set to null. We'll update that value later. And the time zone for her will be -08 GMT. So let's run this insert statement. It says 1 row affected. And let's look at what we've got for this 15th employee. It's Des Jones. Notice the status was set to orientation. Well, this was great. We know all inserts will always start off with orientation. The record can be changed later through normal processes. Sometimes we will actually use a default for a record that is most likely going to be the case, and we can always overwrite the default during our insert with an explicit value. For example, what would you say if I were to change this 0800 to default? Why? Most of our locations are in that time zone, and those are our biggest locations. Yeah, every once in a while we will hire somebody who's not in that time zone, but we could always explicitly put those values in. In order to make this a reality, we're going to have to create another default constraint, and it's going to look like this. Let's alter the table employee, and we're going to add a constraint, and we'll call it df for default _employee_time zone, because it'll be on the time zone field. The default will be -08 GMT, and we're going to do that for the field called time zone. Okay, let's give that a run. It says completed successfully. Now let's test it out by inserting another employee. This will be employee number 16, who is Nancy Biggs. And we're going to use the current timestamp, location 1 for manager 11. We're going to put default for the status because she's in orientation. And we'll put null for the hired offset, and then default for the time zone. Run your insert statement. Now let's look at our table. Select star from employee, shows us that we have 16 records. Here's Nancy Biggs, and over here we see her time zone is set to -0800. You may notice that for every employee, we store their hire date as well as a combination of their hire date and their time zone. The field for that is called hired offset, but I didn't populate it with any records for those last 2 employees, hoping somebody else will update it later. Well, let's go ahead and update that. Let's say update employee, and we will set the hire date offset to be equal to date time offset from the hire date based on the time zone. And I'll do that where all of them are currently null. So those ones get updated. All right, let's run this. 2 rows are affected. Great, everything's in place. Now, you can probably understand why I don't want to put this complicated formula inside of one entity of an insert statement. Well, that's another purpose of the default constraint, is to make coding of predictable values a lot easier for reuse. So let's do that. Let's alter the table employee, and we will add the constraint called df_employee_hired offset. And the default value will be this complicated formula of 2 datetime offset based on the current timestamp based on -0800 for the time zone. Now again, if you're in a different time zone, you're going to have to use a different value. So we're going to say that's for the higher date offset. Let's run this. Okay, so how do we put it to use? Well, let's insert into the employee table the following values. Employee 17, which is Wendy Downs, and we'll put current timestamp for the regular hire date. We'll say they're in location 1, working for manager 11. We'll put default, so they go in orientation. Now we're going to put default for the higher date offset, and we're also going to put default for the time zone. Let's run this, and let's see what we've got. Look what was automatically entered: the orientation status, the higher date offset, and the time zone. Lab 1.3, Skill Check 1. Create a default constraint named df_employee_location ID that sets the default for the location ID field of the employee table to 1. Skill Check 2. Create a default constraint that sets the unit discount field for the sales invoice detail table to 0. Use proper naming conventions for this constraint. Skill Check 3. Create a default constraint that sets the order date field of the sales invoice table to the current date and time using the current timestamp property.